Welcome, listeners, to the next edition of Coffee with Cow, which is a podcast run by Learn International. We're a provider based in Ireland, offering programming across Europe, UK, Ireland, and Asia. And Coffee with Cow was conceived really in order to be able to start a conversation, an informal chat with stakeholders across the international education sector to talk about a number of things. One, how they got to where they are at the moment and what their thoughts are in terms of where they're going in their future. What's happening in terms of the global crisis that we're undertaking for them personally and professionally and in their institutions. And then lastly, what does this new normal that everybody's talking about actually look like from their perspective? Do we know? Do we not know? Do we have an idea? Those types of things. So, I'm very pleased to welcome today Dr. Caroline Cully, who is the Assistant Director of Study Abroad at Georgia Tech. And it's very good of her to join us and to have a chinwag with us this afternoon. I mean, my afternoon, your morning. Welcome, Caroline.
Morning. Well, afternoon. Well, good day. We'll say good day. Hello, good day.
That works. Yeah, fantastic. It's been interesting, the different people that we've had on the podcast. It's only a few days old, but we've had quite a few people already we've been chatting to, and the different paths that people have taken to get to where they're going. Looking back at your LinkedIn earlier, I was, we've known each other for a while, and I'm looking at this. So what did you do between 2005 and 2008?
I was actually in seminary. I knew that I wanted to get a graduate degree. And at the time I was pretty sure that I wanted to go work in a church somewhere. So I decided that if I was going to get a master's, I would get a master's of divinity, which is you could compare it to something like someone going to law school and getting a Juris Doctorate degree. So I spent 3 years in seminary getting my seminary degree, and probably about halfway through, I realized I did not want to be a pastor in a church, that was not my career path. And so I just went ahead and finished my degree because I was halfway through already. And once I finished, I ended up, actually when I graduated, it was 2008. So right when the recession hit, and I couldn't find a job anywhere, quite honestly. So I was working at Starbucks because I had been working at Starbucks all throughout seminary. So I stayed working at Starbucks because they have, they had great insurance. They had health insurance at the time. I think they still do, where I could work 30 hours a week, make pretty decent money, and get health insurance. So probably about a little less than a year after I graduated, I got the opportunity to adjunct teach for the local community college, state college in Orlando, Florida, and started adjunct teaching. And that's really how I got into higher education in that realm. It was just adjunct teaching. And I was teaching, at one point I was adjunct teaching 5 classes, as well as still working at Starbucks to be able to have health insurance, which is a whole nother story about one of the issues with America today, but we won't get onto that soapbox.
No, that's podcast 2.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll come back for that one. Yeah, so I started teaching in the humanities department and just really loved higher education and the thought of higher education. Eventually I was offered what they call a temporary permanent contract, which is kind of oxymoron to say that, but I was offered a non-adjunct status basically. And that's when I got into leading study abroad programs abroad for students.
How did that happen? So when you were offered that position, what happened? One day you were sitting having a Starbucks coffee with one of your colleagues or serving them or whatever it was. And somebody said, hey, I came back from Italy. You should do the same thing. Or how did that actually happen?
I always knew that once I got into higher education, I always knew that I wanted to eventually lead students abroad. And really that stems back to when I studied abroad. I actually never studied abroad when I was getting my bachelor's degree. I was one of those students, it was the early 2000s. I was one of those students who thought, well, I don't have the money to do it, and it's going to prolong my graduations, and my parents will never be behind me doing this. I have been out of the country as a student or as a child multiple times. My parents had taken me locations. Growing up in Florida, it's very common to go to the Bahamas all the time because it's right there. So it's not that I didn't have any overseas experiences. I just didn't do it when I was in bachelor's. So the first time I studied abroad was in Israel during my master's degree. And I remember having a conversation with my professor, fabulous guy. One of those people that you say, I want to be him when I grow up, just a really cool guy. And I remember thinking, man, I want to be able to do that someday. I want to be able to take students abroad in whatever capacity or take people abroad in whatever capacity and help them learn, not just be a tourist, but actually help them learn about where they are and what they do. So that had always been in the back of my head. And once I was offered a permanent contract teaching, and I had the capabilities and the support to take students abroad, I full speed ahead went ahead with it. And I had this idea of taking students to Italy and Greece. And as I was putting together a proposal, the person who was in charge of study abroad said, well, there's another faculty who's doing basically the same exact program. So she and I teamed up. Her name's Tammy. She's fabulous. She and I teamed up together and we started taking students abroad. We did a very short-term program where we took students to Italy and Greece for 10 days, and we talked about Greek, Roman humanities. So we did it over a spring break. So we would teach the students beforehand, have a couple meetings beforehand, and then a couple meetings afterwards, but the bulk of everything was taught during spring break.
That was at Valencia College?
Yes, it was at Valencia. Yep.
Okay, and what size was their program at that stage?
The first year, oh gosh, I think the first year we had about 14 students. The second year we had about 18. And then the third year I didn't go because that's when I transitioned to University of Florida.
Well, so I mean, their program in general.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's a very interesting location because it's technically a state college because they do offer four-year degrees, but it's very much most students who go there are getting their AA and then they're transferring on to another major university. And so a lot of the students are first gen. They maybe have never been out of the state of Florida. So for them to think about even leaving the country is a really big deal. So they're relatively small. I think now they're up to maybe 15 or so faculty leds that they lead every year, that are led every year. Some are spring break, some are during the summer. Most, if I remember correctly, are about between 1 and 3 weeks. They don't really do a whole lot of long-term because, again, a lot of these students are first gen, so they're going to school and then they're working as well. So they can't take a long amount of time off of work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I always find it interesting to see the different profile of programs that are built up, and that's, I think, the important thing to understand the institutional requirements, but also then the student requirements, and you're building something that's fit for purpose for your students' population. And so tell me how that changed then when you transitioned from Valencia College up to UF, this, one of the largest public institutions in the States, 55,000 students, whatever it is. That must have been a bit of a change. Yeah,
I think it's actually like the fifth largest public institution in the country, actually. It was interesting because I was at this point where I was applying for a tenure track position to stay teaching at Valencia College, and I was applying because it was what I was supposed to do, right? If you're a faculty member, you're supposed to have tenure. So I was applying for this position and it was what I was supposed to do. And the whole time I was thinking, is this what I really want to do with my life? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, like, I don't know. I don't know if this is what I want to do. And so I had a moment of like, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to be when I grow up? Yeah. And so the more I thought about it, the more I thought of, I really want to be in international education full time. And so call it fortuitous, call it God's plan, whatever you want to call it. I actually did not get offered a tenure track position at Valencia. And so at that point, I took it as a sign and said, okay, I'm going to start applying for positions in international education. I'm just going to take a chance. And, if it's meant to be, it will be. And I remember my husband and I had we're on our way to our family's house, which was about an hour and a half away. And we were driving, and I just happened to see like, let's see if University of Florida has anything. And they had the assistant director position posted. And so this was on like a Friday of a holiday weekend, and it closed that Friday at midnight, and it was already 3:30 p.m. And we got back to my mom's house, and luckily I had all my my resume, my cover letter, all of that already done. It just needed to be tweaked a little bit. Applied really quickly, and then the next Tuesday I got a phone call for an interview. And so it happened really quickly. And I'm a firm believer that when things are meant to be, the path is going to be really simple and easy and clear. And that's exactly what happened for this position. It was an interesting transition from going from a faculty who led study abroad to being full-time in a study abroad office. I don't know that the population or the amount of students was really the issue. It was learning administrative side of study abroad in the international education field. So I think for me, the first year and a half was really eye-opening in terms of how a large public university functions with study abroad, but also just the amount of programs we had going out. Of course, this is, information is almost a year old, but, up until I left, we probably had close to 80 faculty-led programs, a lot of students going on provider programs, and then students going on exchanges. So, somewhere around like, I think the last number I heard was, 2,500, maybe even up to 2,800 students in 1 year studying abroad, which is a huge number when you're talking about the grand scheme of things. So I learned a lot in those first 2 years. And then I decided that I needed to go get a PhD. And so then I started a PhD.
Well, with all that extra time you had,
with all that extra time, I was like, let's just throw in another thing. Yeah.
100 plus programs, and that's Monday morning sorted.
Right.
Yeah. And so, why did you decide you had to get a PhD?
It was one of those things that I don't think I had to. I always knew that I wanted a PhD. I just was unsure of how I was going to pay for it, because that's always the catch, right? Because you can't get an education necessarily for free in America. So, I thought long and hard about why I wanted to get a PhD, and 80% of it was, no, I would even say 90% of it is because I wanted a PhD. I wanted to have those 3 letters after my name. I wanted the accomplishment more than anything. I think that's a large part of it. It helped that because I worked for the university, that they would pay for me to get a PhD, and that they would pay for the tuition, which is great. So I was like, well, I'd be dumb not to do this. So I started thinking about what I would do with my PhD in, like what would I do my research in? And I have always really been had very strong opinions on service learning. Even when I was, active in church missions, I had strong opinions about that. And there's a lot of parallel between church missions and service learning, and just the aspect of that. So thinking about service learning, especially in international education, I literally went around to departments and was like, this is what I want to do my research in. Does it fit here? And I got some no's, and I got a yes. And then I ended up in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communications, and with the emphasis in extension education. And that's where I spent 3 years, 3 glorious, stressful, mind-numbing at times. I'm pretty sure all these gray hairs are from getting a PhD, but it was great.
And did you, I can, it's funny to hear you say you really wanted that sense of accomplishment. I can totally empathize with that. I want to do a PhD because I want a sense of accomplishment. Sometimes I grapple internally with whether that's a selfish point from my perspective, you know what I mean? But no, I don't think so. I choose to do whatever I want to do with my life, and that's something I would like. I don't think we'll be in a situation where, we'll be able to get it paid for, but
Yeah.
you never know. We don't know what's around the corner these days. You don't know what's going to, so, but going back to service learning, it's an interesting space in international higher education, the service learning piece, because there are institutions that have a very defined policy.
Mm-hmm.
It's integrated into the curriculum. It's a core requirement. It's this, that, and the other. There are other institutions that, I kind of heard of that, but if a student wants to do it, it's really extracurricular. They can do whatever they want themselves, and everything in between. You mentioned strong opinions. What are they?
Oh, how much time would you have? No,
all the time in the world.
All the time in the world. Yeah. I think that there's no, going back to, what universities are doing, in terms of service learning and how they define it. When I was starting to finish my PhD, and I was in the midst of finishing my dissertation, and I started applying for positions because I knew I needed to leave UF because there's just the natural progression of things. Mm-hmm. And so I started applying for positions, and I thought maybe I want to be in service learning full time, and be in charge of a university's service learning program. So I remember applying for this one job, and I had an initial interview, and the interview went horrible. They didn't invite me back, which is fine, not where I was supposed to be. But I remember doing research for the interview and looking at their definition of service learning. And it was a huge co-curricular component of a student's degree. Like if you came in as a freshman student, you had to complete 80 hours by the time you graduated. I was like, this is great. And then I started looking at what they counted. Well, a student could go volunteer at a food bank for an hour, just, packaging or moving stuff, and they would count that as service learning. But that's not service learning, right? That's just the service learning or the service component of the two. In order for it to be service learning, there has to be that learning component. You have to have active reflection. It really goes back to, not to get too much into theory, but it goes back to the idea of Kolb's theory of experiential learning, that you have to have all of these pieces in order for students to actually have the experience and have the learning aspect. And if you're missing any one of those pieces, students aren't gonna have a full circle when it comes to learning. And so that's one of my biggest soapboxes when it comes to service learning is you can't just do service, you have to have active learning, active reflection as a core component and a core piece. And so I see a lot where universities are like, oh, we have service learning, we're gonna go do this. And they want to seek out the Carnegie the Carnegie designation for community engagement, and they want to do all these things, but they're missing the core piece of it's service learning. It's not, there's a hyphen between those two because they're complementary. It's not service by itself and learning by itself. You have to put the two together. So that's probably my biggest pet peeve when it comes to service learning. I think the second is really this idea of sustainability. Service learning, I think, has especially for us in America, we have a certain responsibility when it comes to service learning. We have the ability and the capability, if you have the ability and capability to go somewhere and perform service learning, you also have a responsibility to make sure that you're not leaving people in a lurch. You shouldn't be going and working on a project and then maybe it damages what your project does is actually more harmful than good. I think that stems a lot from my being in the church missions, where we would raise so much money to go to whatever country, and then we'd build some kind of building in the city and say, hey, we came and we did this for you. When in actuality, we weren't really helping. We could have sent that money, and the village or wherever could have used that money for purposes that really benefited them. But now they have a building that's probably pretty shoddily built because we're not professionals. More so, we took money away from a family earner because he wasn't hired to build the building. So, there's all those complexities when you think about it. And especially, nonprofits when they go in and into developing countries, developing nations, and do something similar, it can be really damaging to a country. And shouldn't be about us and what we do. It should be about the locals. So that's my other soapbox.
That's really, really interesting. I'd like to stay with it for a minute, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how does a university, there's this huge ethical piece to service learning, and that's multilateral in terms of, ethics and responsibilities to the student learner as a customer of the university,
right. Yeah.
and from the point of view of the remit and mission of the university to impart holistic learning and that type of thing. So there's that. Then there's a responsibility if there's any research being done within the university to progress. And then there's obviously arguably the most important responsibility is to the community itself. And that in and of itself has multilateral levels, in that you're doing, as you go each year, you're doing the right thing.
Right.
You're being stand-up citizens, so to speak, and what have you, and you're not on an individual program basis leaving something behind, but that there's a multi-annual plan in place to continually leave something better. And so I often find it's interesting when we start to engage with people that are interested in building service learning programs, and it is not the same as a individual standalone customized faculty-led program, those types of things. Going to study international finance in wherever it is, Frankfurt or London or Sydney, and building something like that, while it can be experiential, it's a totally different level altogether. And so it takes a huge amount more thing. So what I mean is, to what extent does the university's responsibility go? Where does that ethical line lie between, this is, to what extent? You obviously have to have a partner at some stage, a door into the community, and how do you start that conversation?
Yeah, I think the conversation really lies with who's taking the student. If we're talking in the international context, the conversation really lies and starts with the faculty who's leading the students abroad. I think that's where you really have to start that conversation. Maybe it's more of a shared responsibility in this case between the faculty and the study abroad office, whoever's helping guide the faculty in developing the program. Because it should be, the faculty should understand that they need to make sure that their whatever project or wherever they're doing the service learning, that it's a sustainable project. But it's also the responsibility of the study abroad office to help guide the faculty. We don't want to do, my opinion is that we don't want to do more harm than good. And sometimes there's a very fine line between those two. And so it's about helping the faculty maybe find the people on the ground who can help to make sure that it's sustainable, whether it's finding a provider who can connect the faculty with the right people, the right nonprofits, the right organizations who are already doing the work, or if it's the faculty already having connections and creating more connections in order to take the students abroad. What we don't want in service learning is for a faculty member to go in and say, oh, I'm going to lead this program. It's going to be great. We're going to go into a community and we're going to build this project. Meanwhile, there's already a nonprofit who's doing the work on the ground. And now we're competing with that nonprofit, and that nonprofit organization, we're taking away resources from them because we're the new shiny group, and we're like, oh, this is what we should do because we know best, because we have the knowledge, we have the education, we have all of these things. Meanwhile, the organization is the one who's going to be there once we leave in 6 weeks. So I think that there's a lot of responsibility that the faculty member has, and a lot of responsibility that the people whoever's helping the faculty member develop the program has as well.
Yeah, it's so multi-layered. It
is
quite a difficult thing.
And it's never going to be perfect, right? You're going to mess up. You're going to make mistakes. But I think that if we go in with the mindset of it's not about us, the people who are doing the service learning, it's about the organizations. We're not at the center of the story. We shouldn't be at the center of the story. It should be the people who are actually doing the work on the ground 24/7, 365.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I think that
Yeah.
there's buy-in needed from an institutional level in terms of
Right.
the university. There's buy-in from the student that they're doing it and they're there for the right reasons. The crucial buy-in is that community and
Right.
that connection and the messaging that goes to the community and says
Yeah.
that we're here for the long run. We're not here just for a year and those types of things. And I found that the real magic that can happen in these types of programs where you really find a program that's going to become the fabric of the annual timetable, like schedule of a community, is when you're there in your fifth and sixth and seventh year.
Yeah.
And you haven't done, oh well, the professor's gone, so we've been there for 4 years, let's find something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have there's that moral and ethical piece where, if it goes a bit stale, do you move on or do you stick to the community that stuck with you?
Right.
Those types of things. But we could have a whole podcast series based on that. So it's just
write that down for another.
The next podcast.
I'll come back. I'm not. It's my human interaction for the day, so I'll be glad to do more podcasts.
So you're in Florida. Take us through then. So you shifted across from Valencia College. You land in this assistant director role, and you're kind of like, oh, what happened? And we have all these programs, and it's boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And it's a baptism of fire. And then, I think you see this a lot in the industry where there's it's a natural time. It's time people outgrow institutions outgrow people, for a whole plethora of reasons. We see it all the time with partners that we're talking to.
Right.
And then you're out and you're in the job market again and you're looking around. How hard was that to progress, to look for the right role,
I think it was looking at my skill set and knowing eventually where I think that I want to go, and realizing that I still had some skills I needed to learn. And so I'm a very big fan of experiential learning. And when I talk about experiential learning, I'm talking about internships, research, and service learning, in particular, how those function within international education. I mean, that's what my PhD is in. So I started looking for positions really, not just within international education, but positions that really focus on experiential learning. And so some universities have been doing it a while. Other universities, it's up and coming. They're just trying to figure out what that means for them. And so, as I was doing this and seeing these positions come about, just applying for them, knowing that even though I loved University of Florida, I loved my time there. I got a degree from there. My husband got a degree from there while we were in Gainesville for 5 years. But knowing that I could not do what I wanted to do in that position, I needed to look elsewhere. So I started applying and had some interviews, had some on-campus interviews. We were really at the time looking to stay in Florida. We're both, my husband and I are both Florida natives, born and raised. We're from the same hometown. All of our family lives there. So we didn't really want to leave Florida because we wanted to stay close to family. And this position at Georgia Tech came open, and it's associate director for exchanges and internships. And I looked at my husband and I said, I have to apply for this. And he was like, okay. He's very supportive in that nature. My dad is an alum of Georgia Tech. I have a lot of family who's actually gone to Georgia Tech. It's probably my first love when it comes to universities. I remember the first college football game I ever went to was actually when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And it was a Georgia Tech homecoming game with my dad and my mom and my sister. And so it's the first team I ever rooted for. And I thought to myself, I have to apply. I'm going to apply and see. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got from someone is don't tell yourself no, let them tell you no. And because there's no harm in applying. And if they say no, then they say no. So I applied, got an initial Skype interview, and the interview was about 20 minutes. And I was like, well, I don't know how that went. We'll see how that goes. I was like, okay. And about a week later, they called me back and said, we'd like to invite you for an on-campus interview. And I was like, oh, okay. So I planned the interview, planned to go up for the interview. And we came up a little bit early because my husband had never been to Atlanta. And so, you know, when you're thinking about moving out of state like that, it's very much a family decision. Yes, I want to progress my career, but if it's going to be detrimental to my family, then we're not going to do it. That's just the bottom line. We're very lucky in that my mom is originally from Georgia. And so we have a lot of family here. A lot of our extended family lives in Atlanta area. So we were able to see my great aunt, who's now 95. So we had dinner with her, and then we just kind of perused around Atlanta. And then Monday and it was actually the first day of classes for Georgia Tech. So I'm walking around campus and there's all these students, and it's that new start of the semester vibe. And I have my interview and I leave, and we're on our way to the airport to fly home. And David says, how'd your interview go? And I said, I have no clue. I don't know how that went. And I didn't think I was going to get a job offer, quite honestly. About 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, something like that, I got a job offer, and I was very surprised. I had just had an interview for another position, and it was actually a faculty position at University of Florida with experiential learning focused coursework. And so it was a very big, hard decision. And so I had just had the interview, so I had to call the search committee chair and say, hey, I have a job offer. What's going on with this position? Did not get offered the job at University of Florida. So I took the job at Georgia Tech, and within 6 weeks, we put our house on the market, sold our house in 2 days, found a place in Atlanta, moved up here, and I started a job. So it was a little bit of a crazy time, but really good time.
That's just amazing. I love hearing these types of stories. Thanks for being so open with us on this. It's really inspiring to see these things. Like, one of the things, I think the messaging that we're hearing over here anyway, in Ireland, in terms of the reaction to COVID and what the government has done and those types of things, is that they have moved mountains in literally days, and you can equate 1 day to a year in terms of what it would take to do what they're doing now if COVID wasn't part of the situation. So it just goes to show, with the right mentality and with a team think, what can be done, and I really love that. I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that if I can at some stage. Don't tell yourself no, let them tell you no.
Yeah. And it's probably one of the best pieces of advice I have ever gotten, is because I was trying to decide if I was going to apply for a position, and I can't remember now where the position was. Clearly, I didn't get that job. I don't even think I got an interview for that job. But the person who I was talking to about it, she said, "Don't tell yourself no. You're good enough to apply for this job. You have the credentials, but let them be the one who tells you no, because you might just not be what they're looking for, and that's okay. But you don't know if you don't try. So don't tell yourself no." I was like, that's so all right.
I love that. I really do. And then another thing that you said, I can't remember your exact words, but it's the notion of us as professionals and people, reflecting on ourselves and the skills that we have. And, what skills do I need? You spoke about when you moved from UF to Georgia Tech, that you still needed a couple of skill sets, and being okay and comfortable to move on to the next situation, knowing that, I still need to build out. I think we all need to build out all throughout our life in general, but it shows a real amount of courage to be able to go out of your comfort zone and say, I'm going to take this job, and I have to learn on the job as I go and build out these skill sets as well. I love that. I find that really inspiring. That's great. But going back to what I was saying, where, with how, globally countries and cities and towns and families and individuals have moved mountains because of COVID. I can't believe we're talking 40 minutes and we haven't even got to that yet. So.
Come back for interview part 2.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But what is happening? So how long have you been at Georgia Tech? Did you have a chance?
6 months. I literally,
wow.
yeah, I started November 1st. And so within a few weeks of starting, all of the riots were going on in Hong Kong.
Mhm.
So we had to get all of our students out of Hong Kong. And then now COVID. It's been a great 6 months. I say
It's
that a little
unbelievable.
tongue in cheek. No, it's
Of
been a
course, of course.
really interesting and eye-opening time for me because I have a lot of knowledge. I have a lot of experience, but I don't have a lot of institutional knowledge yet. So it's been an interesting experience for me because I'm not in a position where I can really be like, oh, here's what we need to do because nobody knows me. And so there's no weight behind that, more or less. And so for me, it's been really relying on, the director and my colleagues to help answer questions that I have because, I don't know who to contact for certain things. And it's been a real building experience because I'm getting to learn to know all of these people because we're having to figure things out a lot of times on a case-by-case situation when it comes to students.
Mm. That's an interesting piece. I think every sentence that we have is another potential podcast. But that institutional knowledge piece. First of all, I haven't said congratulations on the new role, which I
Oh,
should have said.
thanks.
I'm sure I've said it off air, but
Yeah.
I don't want people to be going, he didn't even say congratulations. I'm never listening to this again. But no, it's wonderful. It's exciting and it's brilliant. But I'm interested about that institutional knowledge piece because you're competent, you have the level, you have the requirement, you were given the job, they trust you, you trust yourself, and then somebody comes in and goes, "Who do I speak to for this?" And you're like, the
Yeah.
most common, easiest of questions. I worked in many different roles in my life all over the world, and I
Mm-hmm.
have my own kind of thought process that no matter what job you're doing, it takes you 6 months to
Yeah.
get that bedded down, and you start like the semblance of new relationships. You've gone through some tough times with colleagues, so there is a bedrock there, and they go, oh yeah, this person is somebody I can trust.
Yeah.
And if everything goes rosy for those 6 months, you haven't had those hard times that people have had to rely on you and those types of things. So I wonder whether that's going to expedite your assimilation into GC because of Hong Kong and now COVID as
Mm-hmm.
well, and you've had to kind of fight together for it. But talk to me a little bit about what did COVID look like for you guys, like on the ground, February, what's happening?
Yeah. So for us, we really started, it kind of was a wave. We were not a university and some universities did that. And obviously that's well within their right that they made the decision right off the bat, no programs, nothing, we're going to cancel everything. But we did things in waves. And so we started with the students who were supposed to study abroad in China when I can't remember I think it was the CDC travel warning that first went up to a level 3, and Georgia Tech's policy is students cannot study abroad in a CDC level 3 or a State Department level 3 and above. So when China went to level 3, we said, okay, we're not going to send students to China. So we canceled we only have one exchange program there. So we canceled students studying abroad in China for the semester. Thankfully, they had not left yet. Their semester hadn't started. So we didn't have to worry about, evacuating. And then as we start to see, then I think it was South Korea came next, if I remember correctly, and then Italy. And then we made the decision for Japan as well, because there was a lot of concerns about Japan. And so those were the first four countries that we canceled programs in. Thankfully, South Korea students the semester hadn't started yet. Some students had gone, and so we instructed them to come back home. Italy, the students were halfway through their semester, so the host institution was able to allow the students to complete their coursework online, which has been a huge help because otherwise students would have a complete lost semester. And then eventually when everything went to a level 3 and a level 4 that you started to see happening, the university president actually came out and said, we're going to cancel all the programs. So when that happened, we had to start working on getting students home, wherever home might be, because we have a large international student population, and that's something to consider as well. And so thinking about the impact of that, so, we had to work on getting students home. Thankfully, I think the vast majority of students are able to complete all their coursework online. Um, the US and what the US institutions are doing in terms of moving completely online is happening worldwide in higher education right now. Almost, I would say 100% of students were able to complete, if they had not started the semester yet, they were able to complete the semester online. We only had maybe one or two students where it was special circumstances and they couldn't. So it's a very stressful time. Very stressful because not all students wanted to come back to the United States, and their logic is not necessarily wrong in terms of, waiting in long airport lines and waiting, being in an airplane for however many hours that they might have more exposure. But I think once more countries started closing borders and once more countries started implementing lockdowns and quarantine, students started thinking, oh, well, I can complete my coursework online. If I'm going to be quarantined, I'd rather be quarantined at home. And so some more students, they stopped protesting and started making their way home. So yeah, it's been an interesting time in the field. There's Georgia Tech has canceled all summer programs as well. So that's been, I only deal with exchanges and internships. A lot of the students go on faculty led, of course. And so there's been a lot of shifting of how can we still offer these courses, but do it in a remote manner. So it's a weird time to be in international education. I'm friends on Facebook with quite a few people who work in international education, and on the being in the institution side, people are tired. It's been a stressful time because you're worrying about the safety of hundreds of students, and trying to impart to them why you're making this decision to bring students home, or telling them that why their programs are canceled. And then on the provider side of things, providers are getting hit really hard with nobody's studying abroad, then nobody's paying the bills, to be quite frank. And so what does that look like? And so it's a hit to, talking about the economy at large, but in international education, it's a real big hit to the economy of international education. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, so much stuff to talk about there. What is Georgia Tech doing about filling that gap this summer? Is there a clear strategy, or is it, we're just going to have to see how it goes, or,
There was some thought before. So the Georgia Tech is governed by the University System of Georgia, and that's the governing body, for lack of better words, of all of the state universities and colleges. So the USG determined that there would be no on-campus classes for the summer, rightfully so. I think that was a good decision. So all coursework is going to be given online. So there was some thought of how we could do things before that directive came out. And now that directive is out, I'm not sure what's going on in terms of if faculty are doing online courses for these classes or what's going to happen with that. That's not something I'm privy to necessarily. I know for us, for my group in exchanges and internships, we're working with providers to possibly provide virtual internships so students can get some, experience. Exchanges we don't really have to worry about during the summer. So it's creating a new normal. There's, virtual internships can still provide a lot of experiences for students, and a lot of really good work experience as well, especially if they are partnered with a really great organization who is willing to go the extra mile to help the students. There's some things I think that with virtual internships you can't get, but that's because you're not located in whatever city that the organization is located in, and so there's some cultural components that you're going to miss out on, and there's nothing you can do about that. But at least you're getting some work experience, and you're getting some kind of experience with those virtual internships.
Do you think that those virtual experiences, virtual exchange, virtual online, interaction, internships, those types of things, even, who knows, virtual research, whatever is in the future, or in the future being now and from here on out. Do you think that that's something that's a stopgap situation and it will largely go back to the way it was? Or do you think that it will carve out a place in international higher education whereby it becomes part of the process, a precursor to, in-person mobility, those types of things?
So it's interesting that you asked that question, because I think it depends on what perspective you're coming from. I think that if I was coming from someone who was working in an on-campus internationalization office, I would say absolutely virtual internships have a place. Mostly because, the reality is, not while we would like 100% of students to study abroad, the reality is not every student's going to study abroad. But if we're focused on helping students have some sort of international component, virtual internships have a place to fill that, especially if we're talking about virtual international internships. So I think that there's definitely, beyond just what's going on now, I think that there's a place for them. Will they ever be the first choice? I don't know. For us, I'm looking at this as a way, not necessarily a stopgap, but a way to help students still get experience and not have a waste of full summer. If they decide they don't want to do anything for the summer, I completely understand that. Do it now while you have the time, before you become an adult and then you're responsible,
Well, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Right, exactly. I don't think I ever took a semester or a summer off when I was in college. I always worked or did something. And so I think that we'll see the virtual internships continue. I think now they're definitely going to be the first choice because of the situation. But I think that it'll be interesting to see if providers continue to do virtual internships and if employers continue to have it. I know that the State Department has always had virtual internships for students where they can intern in an embassy. I know quite a few people who've done that in the past years. So obviously there's some desire depending on the organization. So, it could go both ways, quite honestly. It could go both ways.
Academically, what are your concerns about virtual internships?
I think academically speaking, like I said previously, there's certain aspects of virtual internships that you're missing out on, and that's the human interaction. And why you get that virtually, I think that there's some things virtually that you miss out on in terms of human interaction, especially when we're talking about culturally speaking. You're not going to have the same experience as if you were in Dublin and the coworkers say, we're going to go to the pub, come have a pint with us at the pub. You're not going to get those kinds of cultural experiences. So I think that that's a very important part, academically speaking, of learning in the work experience. I think the biggest thing, academically speaking, with virtual internships is there has to be some sort of coursework to go along with it, so that whoever is overseeing the internships are checking in on those students to make sure that they're doing their work, helping them understand and navigate nuances of a work environment. And it could be simple as helping them to figure out how to write an email properly. But also to help them navigate just a new work environment and new culture and those kinds of aspects.
So it's obviously a really stressful time for everybody.
Yeah.
I echo that with ourselves and our international.
Yeah.
It's a stressful time for us as well. How do you stay sane? How do you stay positive? From a professional and a personal perspective.
Yeah.
Because you've had a whirlwind 6 months personally.
Oh
and
gosh.
professionally.
Yeah. And I mean, we're ending the 6 months. We moved literally 6 months ago. We moved to Atlanta and we're at the end of this month. So at the end of our 6 months, I have my 6-month evaluation, which is standard. But then we're also buying a house. So we're closing on our house at the end of this month. So it's been, yay. So it's been a crazy 6 months, crazy 6 months. And we got a dog and, just whatever. Pile it on. That's what I say.
Yeah. If you're going to have stress, you might as well take as much as you can.
Right. My dad, who has a lot of, if you think I have bits of wisdom, my dad is where I get it all from. He, at one point in his life, he was an Army Ranger. And so they have a motto, no way around it, but through it. And that's kind of sometimes the mentality that I have to keep together, is because, it's interesting also that you asked that question, because this has been a rough week for me, quite honestly. I'm a very much a extrovert. And so this is now week 5 of working from home. And so I hang out with my dog and my husband. And then David goes to work in the evenings. He actually works for UPS. So he leaves the house and does the twilight shift and goes and works and slings packages. And so he has a little bit of, he's very much an introvert. So he's good with that interaction at work, and he comes home and he's like, all right, I'm good for the day. Where I'm like talking to, every time I take my dog out to walk him, I'm like, oh, there's a person, let me go talk to them. So it's been a little bit of a tough time for me. This week in particular, just the monotony of not getting out of the apartment much. So sometimes I've just literally put our dog Chewy in the car, and Chewy and I have gone for like a 30-minute drive around because I just need to get out of the apartment. Working out, walking, getting some exercise has been really good, and just making sure that I am able to get out of the apartment, which is, we've had pretty decent weather lately. My allergies have been going a little crazy. So every time I sneeze, I'm like, it's not corona, it's just my allergies. It's a real problem here in Georgia right now, because it's like the worst pollen season ever. And so you have to be like, it's allergies, I promise.
No, the cruel irony of it.
Yeah. Professionally, I think that it's we already had the environment in our office of people working remotely, once a week, or, as they wanted to. So the whole concept of working remotely isn't necessarily new. I've realized that I enjoy getting up in the mornings and going to a place to work. It's really hard for me to get up and be like, all right, I'm going to go sit at my dining room table and, do work now. And so that's been a difficult transition for me. So I'm, looking forward to being back in the office to have some like actual real in-person human interaction. So there's definitely aspects of, I miss working in the office. At the same sense, it's nice to be able to wear yoga pants to work right now. I'm not going to lie.
Maybe that's what the new normal looks like.
That's what the new normal looks like. My mom, I was talking to my mom one day, and she's like, oh, I sent you some new work pants, because she's really big into just mailing us random things. And I was like, Mom, I don't need any work pants right now. She's like, oh no, it's a new pair of yoga pants. Like, that's Mom's gold. Got jokes.
That is gold.
It is gold. So I think it's very interesting to see how we're functioning. There's a lot of things we can't do. I think that we have a lot more time on our hands right now, because we don't have students going out right now. We're not preparing to send students out in the summertime. So we have a lot of time for projects that we haven't been able to get to because we've been so busy. So we have a lot more time for those projects, but at the same time, we're just kind of making sure we keep everything afloat for that. When we do get the green light that we can send students abroad again, then we're ready to go. And we're in a very weird waiting period right now. And I think that that's the same for most major universities. I've heard a few that have already started canceling their fall programs and sending students abroad in the fall. We're not at that point, but it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. How long do you think it'll be before you make that decision, or is that the most ridiculous question?
I think,
how long is a piece of string?
Well, first of all, that decision is way above my pay grade, which I'm glad it's above my pay grade at this point in my life. I would suspect, I honestly don't know. I could say they're going to make the decision in May, but it may not come till June. I don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen. And that's part of the issue. Is clearly we see that measures that are happening are now working, and and what I mean by that is the biggest concern was overtaxing the healthcare system. And so staying home so the peak doesn't hit us. And so originally the peak was supposed to be mid-April, and now because everybody's staying home and it's working, that peak keeps getting pushed back. Well, if that peak keeps getting pushed back, that means that we're going to stay on quarantine longer because it's working. But then things stay closed, and there's, all these things to consider. And it's, I'll just sit here in my house until someone tells me to go to work. That's kind of the mentality I have right now. Someone says, we need you back in the office. Okay.
Let me just put my work pants on and off we go.
Let me put my work pants on, my real work pants, not my current work pants.
We should start a movement, a hashtag, yoga pants for work.
Yoga pants for work. I mean, I'm sure there's like somebody out there who's already designed like professional looking yoga pants, right? And
that's our new business. Oh my God, we are going to make millions.
Yes, it's copyrighted, everybody. It's copyrighted. Don't steal our idea.
Yeah, back off, everybody, back off. That's hilarious. So what are you going to do once we're out the other side? What's the first thing you want to do that you can't do at the moment?
This is going to sound so odd because I'm not a big shopper. I just want to be able to like go peruse, like go into, I'm going to do my part and help the economy and go into a shop and peruse and buy maybe a thing or two. Or
what a word. I love it.
We need to take a trip to Trader Joe's, the supermarket. And I was like, man, that's going to be such a crazy, it's always a crazy adventure going to Trader Joe's because it's usually packed. But now when you have to worry about everybody going to Trader Joe's, I don't know. So just I think just the ability to move freely and not have to, having that freedom again to be able to do what I want. Some people are like, oh, I'm going to go to a restaurant. We don't really eat out all that often, so that's not a big deal to us. But I think just the ability to go do things when you want to do them more than anything.
Yeah, or book a flight anywhere. I don't care.
Oh my gosh, I was looking at, I've had 3 trips canceled this year so far. And so I was literally looking at flights last night, because I was just like, I need to dream. I don't know when I'll be able to do any of this, but I'm going to dream. And so I was looking at flights to different places last night. So I don't know, maybe we'll come to Dublin. David mentioned it earlier today that we needed to go back to Ireland. And I was like, oh, I already looked at flights last night.
So that's binding. All the listeners heard that. That's it.
There you
Fantastic. That is brilliant. Well, listen, I suppose we better go and do some work, but look, it's been Friday. It is Friday.
Nothing gets done on Friday. Isn't that like standard operating procedure? Nothing gets done on Fridays.
It's what's funny, sometimes in life you feel like you're living through a movie, which I think the whole world feels like they're doing at the moment.
For sure.
But you have those times in life. I have about 5 or 10 of them. There are these kind of points in time where you have this kind of great life-changing realization, or something happens, or those types of things. And one of them was when I was just graduated and I got at the lowest level kind of cleaning the urinal type job in a stockbroking company in Dublin. And it's what loads of guys that were of us when we were graduating in UCD, we came out, it took 12 of us in. It was like 6 guys and 6 girls, and they put us in this tiny room and we had to do some admin stuff, and that was it. And that's all we did all day long. But it was in the era of early noughties, and there was just so much money everywhere. It was unbelievable. And every Friday at lunchtime, everybody would go down to one of the pubs or one of the shops, and they would just get their lunch and that type of thing. But it was one of those times where your line manager would put the card behind the bar and you'd have a drink for lunchtime. And lunchtime just basically went to the end of Friday, and that was it. And this happened every week. I could not believe it. This is like one of those movies, And then I had this, and I'll leave it at this, but I had one of these moments where there was a social segregation, so where you were on the totem pole was where you stood in the pub. And so we were back by the door of the toilet and the back door emergency door, literally. And it's a long, thin pub, and there's this spectacularly beautiful sunny day outside. And I see this silhouette of one of the kind of upper level managers, and it's just him, and he's holding his pint like this, but because of the silhouette, it looks like it's resting on his belly. And it's just like this, I mean, all you can see is this black outline of it. And I had this moment where all these guys were sitting around, and I was thinking, this is all we've done for the last 10 weeks on a Friday, and that's it. And I just kind of phased out of the conversation, and I went, oh my God, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to be that person in 15 years time, and I'll still be doing the same thing.
Now, moment of realization.
Yeah. So I went in the next week and bought a ticket I went in on the bus to buy a ticket to Australia, and a friend of mine rang me and said, do you know New Zealand? I said, yes, I've heard of it. Do you know Australia? Well, not really, but I'm buying a ticket because somebody told me I should. He said, you should do New Zealand. So I bought a ticket to New Zealand, and I spent all the money I had in the world, and that was it. And I haven't looked back since. But those moments, where you're living in a movie, and I can still see it today. It's just like, get out, run as fast as you can. Dr. Caroline Cully, Associate Director of Education Abroad at Georgia Tech. Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for being open with us about so many different things about what's going on in the world today, where we're going, where you came from, where you want to go, your whirlwind 6 months. It's been amazing to hear. We have about 5 different podcasts we have to go through this.
Coming soon, Caroline, Chris, and the cow.
Yeah, exactly. Just saying. I love it. Oh, that's great. I love it.
Just saying.
So thank you so much. And to our listeners, thanks very much for staying with us. And I hope that you've got something, positive from this. Maybe there's some kind of an empathetic piece there where you're in a similar situation, and you're hearing, what Caroline's situation is, or you have some ideas now that have come from this. That's the idea. I hope that we can, spur some conversation, some thoughts, some debate into where we're going as an industry, but to bring the personal into it as well. And that's what we're trying to do here. So this has been a Learn International podcast called Coffee with Cow. I'm Chris Lawler, and thank you very much for being with us, and tune in again next week for whoever we happen to be talking to at that stage. See you now.
Bye.
Bye.